Hello, this is the RPG Pundit, the final boss in Internet Shitlords. And today, before I start, you can check out here. There's Heroes and Villains of the Silk Road and Social Encounters Along Silk Road, two of the three source books for Sword and Caravan. Though really, Social Encounters is something you can use in any game. It's an expanded version of reaction roll mechanics that allows you to, as DM, adjudicate a number of different social situations without having to resort to things like diplomatic skills or stuff like that. You know, there's instead of doing like intimidation and persuasion and things like that, those sorts of skills. It's resolved through role playing and with the use of the reaction roll mechanic. That's a very good little book. And in the middle here we have the Old School Companion, which is now a platinum bestseller. It's hit platinum, and it is a great source book, originally intended for Lion and Dragon, but there's a lot of stuff in there you can also make use of in Sword and Caravan, or in Baptism of Fire, or in any OSR game where you want to add some more medieval type features. And it's got all kinds of stuff in it. You know, it has different grimoire magic, ritual-based magic systems. It has stuff on medieval authentic elves. It has stuff on the aristocracy. It has things on activities that characters can do in downtime or during adventures, and lots of other great stuff. Hey, look at that! Did you notice something? She's learned already how to jump onto the counter. She has not, however, learned what the camera is for. Hey, Domino. How's it going? How's it going? Yeah, well, you shouldn't get behind the camera. You should be in front of the camera. Everybody wants to see you. Yeah, everybody wants to see you there. Okay, well, you do what you like. All right, she's just off camera right now. I think she's still a little bit confused about what I'm doing here. Oh, there she went. Look at that. She'll probably know. Oh, no, she jumped off. All right. She might come back, though. Like, it's so funny. She's growing up so fast. She just turned 3 months. And she still can't jump directly onto the counter, but she can jump onto a little table that's on the other side of the island in the kitchen, and then jump onto the island, and then do a big jump onto the counter. So she is becoming more independent every day, and she's very cute. All right, so that's basically what I wanted to say about that. The other thing I wanted to mention before I get on to the main topic is that I saw that Mike Mearls has been doing a few rounds of interviews with people. I think he was being interviewed by Mr. Welch. And subtextually, oh, there she is. She's back again. Subtextually, you can see that Mike Mearls is essentially confirming a lot of what I had said in the past about 5th edition, and also you guys might recall that there was a time when there was a lot of people, not just of course there were woke people that wanted Mike Mearls fired, and then there were a lot of anti-woke people that didn't like him either, because he had made some statements that I do not approve of course, but he'd made a few statements that came off as pretty woke. But I was telling everyone, look, no, he's the little boy who's holding his finger in the dike, and the moment that he's gone from there, there'll be a flood, right? An absolute flood of wokeism. Yeah, and that's exactly what happened. Anyway, you okay? No, she's still a little clumsy. Anyway, I just wanted to comment on that. I'm suspecting that I probably won't be having Mike on the RPG Pundit Encounter, but hey, if you're listening, Mike, I'd be very happy to have you on, and we can talk about a number of things. Anyways, today I was going to talk about a particular concept that applies both in game design and in campaign design, I guess you could say, because if you're a DM, you're using a set of rules, and of course, depending on what set of rules you have, you're going to have this issue and you might push into it or you might try to pull away from it somewhat. So it applies to that as much as to if you're the guy making a game. So there's, and I've talked about this before, but I saw a video or two lately that I thought made me want to bring it up again. There's a lot of people that talk about the importance of creating balance, game balance in the game, right? And this can go all the way to like sometimes ridiculous extremes, like how in some games you end up having even like the characters as they advance are scaled to a world that is not in any way realistic, where they will consistently end up facing monsters that are exactly their equals, neither better nor worse, right? So this was a thing I criticized a lot about 4E in the 4E DMG. It was basically suggesting that wherever your characters go, if they go into a dungeon or something, if they're level 1, that's a level 1 dungeon. It should only have level 1 monsters, right? So it creates this complete non-reality to the game world, where characters leave their little town and go off in search of adventure, and the first dungeon they find is a dungeon that only has conflict appropriate level 1, low level monsters, right? It's not because they've heard of that or something, but just because every place they're supposed to go to is going to be like that. But then if they come back a while later and they're level 8, suddenly all the monsters in that dungeon are also going to be level 8 now, and it's just unless you've got a very weird world, it ruins the verisimilitude of that world. So, but that's really the high extreme. And then what's more common, because most people don't do something like that, and most games don't, but a lot of games become very concerned about this idea of balance in the form that all of your player characters should be able to be engaged all of the time and have the same level of capacity to engage in every situation. And 4E did that too, by the way. So it's something that is born of this concept that if a player can't always be able to do something equally important to everybody else at every moment in the game, this is going to be a real problem, but first of all, that also is not good for verisimilitude. Second, it's something that creates a situation that it's never going to actually end up being truly balanced. Okay, so it's a chimera, right? It's something you're looking, you're searching for a dream that can never be fulfilled, and it often ends up doing more harm than good. In a lot of RPGs, you get this idea, and just to use again the D&D kind of example, and you all know that there are certain editions of D&D that do this much worse than others, where if there's a combat, right, you have these characters. You have a cleric, a fighter, a thief, and a wizard. And the attempt of the design is to make it so that each one of those characters will be equally useful in every battle. And that usually means that you're going to end up having characters that end up losing archetype in some way. Or you're going to have some characters that kind of stick to archetype while others do not. And so it becomes a problem there too, right? Essentially, let's say, because combat is one of the easy examples for this. If you're going into a fight with one guy of each of those 4 classes, and every single class can do the same damage to these monsters in a fight, it just kind of looks different. You might think, oh, well, that's good, because then everybody's involved all the time, right? But the downside of that is that it means that really it doesn't matter what class you are, first of all, right? If the attempt to make balance, which is a hard thing to do mechanically, even though it's also a wrong thing to do, if you manage to do it sufficiently well that you really get close to a real balance, it means then that your characters, all they're doing is, it almost becomes like a Euro game, right? Like they're doing the same damage, and only the facade of how they're doing it is different, right? So the warrior attacks with his axe, and he hits, and he does 15 points of damage. And the wizard attacks with a magic missile, and he also does 15 points of damage, right? Or whatever kind of attack spell he has, right? And then, the cleric does a cleric spell that also does 15 points of damage. And the rogue gets to do his sneak attack all the time. So he also does 15 points of damage, And this is something that will mean then what's the point, right? Then the only thing about your class is like a trapping. It's like the fashion that you chose to wear, But more realistically and more often, what happens is that you end up pushing into and against what really should be the concern of a game designer or a DM, which is niche protection, right? It's much more interesting, actually, if you have characters that have a variety of different abilities that are going to be more useful in some situations than the other classes, whereas the other classes will have other situations where they're more useful. So it doesn't mean that you shouldn't, that your fighter can't, or that your wizard can't fight, or something like that. In fact, in my Baptism of Fire game, it's been pretty funny because for those of you who are familiar with the game, there are two holy man classes, right? I split up the cleric into the holy man, who is meant to represent sort of like a medieval saint, which is to say he's not really trained in combat. And he has a bunch of miracles, but most of those miracles are not combat-related miracles for the most part, right? Like he has turn undead, right? So he can, he can be particularly useful if there's an encounter with the undead. But for the most part, his miracles don't do that. He can heal people. He can do, he can be a backup, right? That helps support the rest of the party. He can give the party bonuses, right? He can do blessings that will help them enormously against certain magical creatures, for example. But he's not trained in combat. And then there's the Holy Warrior. The Holy Warrior is meant to be a kind of a paladin, I guess you could say, or a religious warrior who is dedicated to fighting for the faith, and so he is combat trained. And he also gets miracles, but his miracles are different because those are miracles that allow him to better smite his enemies, And in my campaign, we've had two players who have both played holy men. They chose holy man as the class. And I believe in both cases they were technically eligible to be either one. I'm not 100% sure of that offhand, but I think they were. And yet, as holy men, they both decided that their characters would often be in the front line in combat, right? And in the first guy's case, it was because he had as his background, he had a relatively good strength score, and he had as his background that he was a street brawler before he had this religious experience, this vision that he received that led him to become a holy man, right? And so he was routinely, willing to go in there and throw punches and stuff like that, right? And then the other guy was just a holy man. There was no real particular reason for it, but he decided that he was a holy man who would fight, people. Not all people, but well, certainly against opponents that are not, protected by the faith or what have you. So that can happen, right? But in both cases, they were not going to be as effective in combat. They could still fight, right? But they were not going to be as effective in combat as the fighter or something like that, or the witch hunter or the holy warrior, for that matter. And so that's still okay, right? What should happen is that people should expect, okay, well, if you're having a melee battle, then the likelihood is that the martial classes will get their moment to shine there, right? If there's other stuff going on, the other classes have things that allow them to shine. You know, which is what you don't see in a lot of these games that focus on balance, right? As I was saying, one of the problems with certain editions of D&D is that you have, for example, the rogue or the thief who has, you know, traditionally the thief has a backstab attack, which it makes sense, right? It's a special attack, right? And he can probably do a lot of damage when he does a backstab or a, you know, surprise attack, however they want to term it, right? And that's great. But if you also create conditions where, like, technically your opponent doesn't even have to be surprised, they can know you're right there and you can still do a backstab, then suddenly the thief can, especially at certain levels, at certain moments, could theoretically be doing more damage every round than a typical D&D fighter. You know, and that becomes a real problem because suddenly the fighter is useless. And in fact, it's one of the common problems in a lot of editions of D&D that the fighter, well, not useless, right, but he becomes the least interesting class for sure because all he does is fight, and yet if everybody else can fight as well as he does, that's a problem, right? And so, like, the ideal will be that every character can do certain things, but that each class will have an area where they excel. And I think that's also much more, as a rule, it is a much more interesting thing. As long as the class, you know, the way you design the classes is that these will be things that will commonly tend to come up, right? I mean, obviously there might be more combats than other things that come up, but there will still be other things and other ways to participate in these activities, right? Where they can still make a difference, right? So, you know, the wizard type classes in Lion and Dragon or Baptism of Fire are very different from the magic user of D&D who can, you know, sling around magic missiles and fireballs and whatnot. But they can create items that they can use to do a number of really impressive things, and also to you know, increase the abilities of other characters and things like that. And they can also have potentially access to some magic that will also give them benefits in combat, right? But they end up being more important in that there's a big emphasis for the kind of arcane classes, the Magister and the Witch Hunter and the Skomrozni, in the area of, like, lore and knowledge, right? Which is something that harkens back to more traditional kind of wizard-like figures in myth, legend, and folklore, right? That's not just that they're magicians, but also that they have a lot of knowledge, and they're experts in certain fields, one of which is typically magic, right? They could have the occultism skill, and it allows them to identify things and to know things about the opponents they're about to face or things like that, right? If they have occultism or fairy lore or demon lore or things like that, then that provides an advantage of a different kind, you know? So if you're designing a game, I would suggest that you not think about creating balance, right? I mean, if you're going to do that, I guess the place for that is if you want to create a GURPS-like game where everybody just has, like, 500 points, and then you buy everything and you don't really have a class, you know. But you know, that's got all of its own problems too, which is point buy creates a number of real potential issues unless it's very well designed to make sure that there isn't a lot of min-maxing going on. And if you're running a campaign, and it's a D&D type campaign, right, you should instead try to create more of an emphasis on niche protection, on the special things that each character does, and keep it in mind, right? So if you've got a party that has a couple of rogues in it, you know, you might want your campaign to give them opportunities to do the kind of thief rogue sort of things that will be applicable to them, you know, which, depending on what edition you're using, might be to maneuver their way through a dungeon, or it might be the ability to contact the underworld of larger urban centers, right? Like in my games, there's an urban lore skill, which most thieves are going to have, unless they're playing a rural thief, in which case they'll probably have wilderness lore, right? Which is also useful. And so the idea is give them a diverse set of skill sets. Like, look at the A-Team, right? Some of you might be too young to remember the A-Team, but I think most of us do, right? I'm not in denial about the typical age of my viewers, right? So the A-Team had these 4 guys. Each one of them were very different, right? They could do a lot of stuff, but they had different specialties. And those specialties are part of what made it interesting, right? If there had been 4 guys that all had the exact same training or the exact same capabilities, then it would make for a much less interesting experience to see their adventures, So I think that's something you really want to keep in mind. In my games and in my experience, both as a game designer and as a long-term game master. This Sunday, by the way, we just had the 12th anniversary of the Dungeon Crawl Classics World of the Last Sun campaign. We've been playing it every 2 weeks for 12 years now. Now we're on the 13th year. As the next session will be the first session of the 13th year of the campaign. And in that experience, I think that it's much more important that you direct yourself and your character, that you direct your campaign and the characters in the campaign in such a way that each one has the opportunity to develop distinctly, rather than worrying about things being equal and of the world being equal too, right? Don't fall into the idea of world balance, right? The wrong way to do it is to say, well, wherever you go, you're going to have a level, a monster or an opponent that is going to be appropriate to your level. The right way to do it is to have a variety of places and people in the world that the player characters will hear about and might be directed to in some cases, but with a kind of, that they'll have a rough knowledge based on what people in the world would know about how dangerous a situation or a person or a place is. And then they can decide, do we go face this, or is this too much for us, or do we prepare, or do we not bother? So, and sometimes, this harkens back kind of to the old rumors tables that you'd see in a lot of the D&D adventures, where, some of those rumors are going to be wrong, right? So they might be told, yeah, there's some goblins there or something, and maybe there's not. Maybe there's something way more dangerous in there, right? Or on the other hand, you might hear, oh yeah, there's like an army of orcs on the other side of the river, and it turns out to not be anything close to as serious as that, and that all of that sort of stuff gives the impression of a living world. That would mean also that you have to kind of, that starts getting into the topic of sandbox gaming, right? And that you would have to make sure your characters understand that when you're interacting with the world, it's not like a video game where you're being given gaming cues that turn into missions that you absolutely must go to, right? But if they can understand that, and then kind of decide, and then they can decide what level of risk that they want to take. So in general, balance is kind of a dirty word, basically, in RPGs. It's not a particularly useful concept, certainly to center yourself around, right? I think that actually a balanced party is a party of people that have very different abilities that can therefore assist each other in different circumstances, where certain people are going to stand out better than others, okay? So that's basically what I wanted to talk about today. I don't know if you saw, but I put out a little short because just as I had done the last review for the Red Room, like the day after, I got a box full of new books, and there's also a few other products that I've that I've gotten or am about to get pretty soon, including, I hope, 101 Sarmatians, which I will then also review. Well, not review, but I'll do a flip through of it. Design notes, basically. So, if you want to check out a preview of the books that I'm going to be reviewing sometime over the course of this next year, because it's a lot of books, you can check out that short. And be sure to check out all of my products, the Old School Companion and Sword and Caravan and its source books. And also, of course, as always, the Pundit Files on the Red Room. The links are all in the description of this video. And in the case of the Pundit Files, right now, the most current issue of the Pundit Files as of this recording is The Bones of St.Florian. But I think that we're going to be, by the time this comes out, the next one will be there. So you can check in the description. I will be, whatever one I put on there, that's the newest one. Which I think is the Diabolist, but I'm not sure. I'll have to check that later, because we're actually we're getting the books ready ahead of time, so there might be something in between those two. I'm just not remembering which one it is. So, anyways, check it out. Check out the Red Room store. Check out the Pundit Files. You can get any one of the currently 27, possibly now 28 issues of the Pundit Files for just $3.50. Okay, don't forget that. And, well, that's it for today. Currently smoking, or actually just finished smoking, is this Lorenzetti Half Volcano plus Argento Roots.